Allegiance by Timothy Zahn was set not long after the Battle of Yavin, and features the earliest chronological appearance thus far of Mara Jade. Zahn said that he found writing Allegiance relatively easy because it's set in between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, so he had a definitive starting point for characters like Luke and Han and Leia, and also where they needed to end up in Empire Strikes Back as well. So he was able to extrapolate how far Luke is on his Jedi journey, how much Han does or does not want to commit to the rebel cause, and how much Han and Leia's relationship has progressed up to this point. Allegiance by Timothy Zahn ultimately made it to number 10 on the New York Times bestseller list for the week of February 18th, 2007, and was ultimately on the list for 2 weeks. I read Allegiance when it first was released. In fact, I pre-ordered it in hardcover. This is not my original hardcover. I don't know what happened to that. I got another one later down the line, and I remember enjoying it, but also not really retaining anything that happened in it. So first, a brief summary. The destruction of the Death Star by the Rebel Alliance was a decisive blow against the Empire, but Palpatine and the monstrous Darth Vader still remain a looming threat. When Princess Leia Organa, Han Solo, and Luke Skywalker are dispatched to the Shelsa sector to try to incorporate different rebel groups into the burgeoning Rebel Alliance, little do they know that also in the sector is Mara Jade, the Emperor's personal agent, 5 rogue stormtroopers, pirates, and eventually even Vader himself. Allegiance is a quick, fast-paced read, especially for a Zahn novel. It's just barely over 300 pages, and really keeps the story focused on our trio of Luke, Han, and Leia, Mara Jade, Derek Larone, and the 4 other renegade stormtroopers, and then our various bad guys, who include those pirates, Disra, part of the triumvirate from the Hand of Thrawn duology, and here just a lower down Imperial minion. Captain Ozzel, who is not yet made Admiral, but is still an idiot. And eventually Vader as well. But viewpoint-wise, we obviously get Han, Luke, and Leia, and Mara Jade. We get Derek Larone to represent all the stormtroopers. And then on the bad guy front, we really mostly get Disra's POV and experience what's going on with the other baddies through, say, Mara Jade's viewpoint or someone else's viewpoint. Disra is the key way of figuring out what's going on with all these conspirators. So the plot is as follows. Mara Jade, 18 years old, is going about in service to the Emperor, uncovering treasonous plots. At the beginning, she uncovers evidence against a Moff, and that includes some stolen artwork. Tracing that stolen artwork leads her to the Shelsha sector. Zahn, why do you have to put 2 SHs in it? And then she starts tracking the pirates who are a growing presence there. Meanwhile, 3 rebel groups in, you guessed it, the Shelsha sector have reached out to the Rebel Alliance. One of them has a plan, the other 2 are opposed to the plan, and they're all threatening to leave if their demands are not heard. So Leia is sent to negotiate with them, while at the same time Luke and Han are sent off on a separate mission to figure out what's going on with all this pirate activity in the Shelsha sector. Meanwhile, Captain Ozzel and the ISB personnel aboard his ship, the Reprisal, squash a rebel group on the world of Teardrop, which coincidentally Luke and Han were evacuated from at the beginning of the book. Except the rebels had already all gotten off the planet, so it was just a straight-up massacre of the people in town. The stormtrooper Derek Larone doesn't feel good about this. Several of his buddies also don't feel good about this. And when an ISB officer confronts Larone to say, hey, you deliberately misfired, it's pretty much self-defense, and Larone kills him. So then Larone and 4 other guys are on the run. They steal an ISB ship, and they're doing a lot of vigilante action because while they might not be happy with the direction that the Empire is taking, they still feel loyal to the Empire. They still feel allegiance to it. And they also stumble upon all this pirate activity in the sector. And finally, the bad guys are stealing stuff, commandeering things, being pirates, ostensibly led by Disra, who seems to be aiming towards the capital of the Shell-Sha sector, leaving the Empire and declaring independence, but it's probably going to be a bit more complicated than that. And as you may have guessed, with all these different groups running around in the same sector, they are going to intersect at various points. So let's talk about the original trio first. Luke is definitely a fledgling Jedi. He's got a lightsaber, but that's pretty much it. And so he actually has Obi-Wan at times talking to him, like happened during the Battle of Yavin, giving him a little bit of advice, or saying like, hey Luke, you need to sense things. What do you sense? According to an interview that Zahn did with the Star Wars website back in 2007, originally Obi-Wan was maybe interfering a little bit more, and Del Rey and Lucasfilm wanted him to pull back a bit. So he tried to keep it to what we saw in the film, that Obi-Wan's not going to outright tell him, like, you need to do this and you need to do that, but trying to prompt him towards actions. And so when Luke and Han run into the Hand of Judgment stormtroopers, it's Luke's perception of the Force that says, hey, wait, these aren't bad guys. I think they're on our side. Let's go along with them. I really like how Zahn writes Han. I think that he really likes Han, and he definitely felt true to himself here in that he intervened at the Battle of Yavin. He saved Luke, but he's not officially a member of the Rebel Alliance, and he's not ready to commit himself to being so. And yet people saying, well, since you're not officially a member, you could do this and you could do that, really rubs him the wrong way. He's definitely divided within himself. He knows that if he asked Chewie, Chewie would say, yes, I want to side with the Rebel Alliance. You saw what the Empire did to my people. But Han's not quite there yet. It's interesting, though, because in comparison to Empire Strikes Back, he's not really concerned yet about paying off Jabba, about leaving. He's like, man, wish I could have taken a paying job, but that's not a priority in his mind yet because he hasn't run into that bounty hunter on Ord Mantell yet. He's also definitely interested in Leia, even if he's not willing to admit it yet. Their interactions come off definitely in that antagonistic Empire Strikes Back manner, where Han definitely likes her, but he's gotta be difficult, and that rubs Leia the wrong way, and then she just goes storming off, and really, Han, you didn't accomplish anything here. I also like, though, that since Luke and Han interacted with the Hand of Judgment stormtroopers, we also got, a little bit of Han's backstory that, yes, he was an Imperial, he got the Corellian blood stripes, that's an honor, and he left because of how the Empire was treating other people, specifically Wookiee slaves. That's how he and Chewie met, after all. The Hand of Judgment stormtroopers are definitely on a similar trajectory as Han was, but whereas Han became a smuggler, became someone outside of the law, and then is now slowly becoming a rebel despite himself, the stormtroopers are on a different path. Leia's obviously still feeling the grief and regret that comes from the loss of her homeworld and the loss of her family, but she's pushing through. She's doing what the rebellion requires of her. And I think her negotiations on Shell-Sha, more than anything, show how good she is at that side, at listening to people, at coming to decisions on things but not immediately making her decisions known, because She has to talk to Mon Mothma and others. And then when her identity is outed and she has to go into hiding, she's willing to step in and do something that she's never done. She's working as a server. She's not good at it. But her respect for the people around her, especially when she foils this burglary attempt, means that the people of the area respect her likewise. But I feel like more so than Luke and Han and Leia, the book is really focused on Mara Jade and the Hand of Judgment stormtroopers. This is 18-year-old Mara, still when she believed in everything that the Emperor says and does and everything the Empire stands for. She's not an assassin like later books portray. She's more the Emperor's personal agent, and she more goes around and investigates things. He says, I suspect this person of treason. And she goes and she says, well, here's the evidence I collected. And then it's outside of her hands. That person is probably killed, but she still tries to intervene for people that she thinks are loyal. When she uncovers evidence against the Moff, she still speaks up in defense of a general there who was not treasonous and who helped her in a possibly uncomfortable situation. She eventually realizes that the stormtroopers are not under a mission for anyone, that they're off on their own. And she very well could have turned them in, but she doesn't, because I think she recognizes that they're doing good. They were in a bad situation, and they're trying to make the most of it. But this Mara is also very naive, because there's obviously corruption and rot in the Empire, and it starts at the source, but she just can't see that. She thinks that she's doing good and that the Empire is doing good, and that Palpatine is good. So despite her competence at what she does, there's this definite innocence to her character that she'll lose later on. I did feel a bit like maybe Mara's Force skills were a little overdeveloped here, especially when we look at her in comparison to Luke, who can't do much of anything yet. He can sense things, but that's really about it. Mara does a lot. At one point when they're going to the pirate stronghold, she's just flying her lightsaber along, like, besides the speeder. And I know that obviously when we meet Mara in the Thrawn trilogy, that her skills have really regressed, that she hasn't had any opportunity to use them, and in fact, the Emperor's death probably was a psychic scar that affected her ability to use the Force for years afterwards. But I did wonder, like, would she be able to do this much? Would she be able to Force jump up 3 stories? She was trained from infancy, but I'm just not sure that she would be this competent in her Force abilities. I think that her other skills I could see her utilizing because she's received extensive training, but that was the one bit where I was like, would she really be able to do all of this though? And all of this so well? And then the Hand of Judgment stormtroopers were maybe my favorite part of the whole book. They're just 5 regular dudes, elite stormtroopers, so they're actually good at shooting, and Larone and the others were disturbed by what happened to Alderaan. How could the Empire destroy a peaceful planet like that? Even if they were allied with rebels, why would you blow up an entire world with billions of people on it? So I think then being ordered to fire on civilians on Teardrop, civilians who obviously are not rebels, that they're given no time to investigate, are the rebels still here? What did they leave behind? Instead, the order is just to kill them all and to start with the aliens and then move on to the others. And also having ISB's involvement does not feel right to them. A sentiment that is shared by both Legends and the new canon. Everyone hates the ISB. Oh my gosh. Ew. I feel like the Hand of Judgment are prime rebel candidates. They're just not there yet. They've recognized where the Empire has gone wrong, but they still think that, like, there is good in the Empire, and if only we could just enforce it ourselves. And you really want them to side with the rebels because you're like, hey, you guys are good. You guys are trying to do good things. Why don't you join up with more good people? But I feel like they still have that Imperial mindset where they just think rebels are bad. Rebels are upsetting the system. Rebels are making a big old mess. And it's like, well, yet they are. Because the system is corrupt and the only thing you can do is overthrow it. They're still trying to work within the system somewhat. And then on the bad guy front, Captain Ozzel is an ambitious idiot who, when 5 stormtroopers run off from the reprisal, he's willing to go along with the ISB officer and just try to kill them. And in the process, try to kill the Emperor's hand as well. She really does not like that. The ISB are just ISB. The little bits we see of Vader from Mara's point of view is that Vader has found out that the person who destroyed the Death Star is named Luke Skywalker, and he is desperate to get Luke Skywalker. And when he thinks that Mara is interfering with his attempt to get Luke Skywalker, he is mad about it. I think that Vader sees Mara as a threat, but Mara doesn't. Mara's like, Vader's completely out of my league, I'm just doing my job. And finally, in the whole pirate independence scheme, we've got Caldra, who is working for Disra to order the pirates around. We never learn Caldra's backstory in the end, and he's killed by Mara Jade. The pirates are led by a man named the Commodore, who is an absolute nutjob, and who is killed when Ozzel attacks the pirate base because he's trying to kill Mara Jade. And it ends up that this whole plot was orchestrated by Disra, but in typical fashion for what we saw of him in the Hand of Thrawn duology, he basically went along with this so he could turn on people and get, a little higher up in the Empire as a result. So my first issue with Allegiance was just that it's slight. Like, it's not a major book that has major impacts on things to come. So I think you need to sort of temper your expectations when you read it. I remember being sort of disappointed with Allegiance back in the day because I think I was expecting it to do more than it does. But really, it's just like a snapshot of what's going on after A New Hope. You sort of see the state of the galaxy as displayed in what's going on in the Shelsha sector. You see Luke is making a little bit of progress on his Jedi journey. Han's making maybe a little mental progress in aligning himself with the rebels. We get to see Mara at the height of her competency before she became bitter and jaded and realized that the Empire was actually bad. But it's not essential. And I think part of that comes from Zod having to fit this in between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. It's like, what's gonna happen in Empire, so Allegiance can't have huge consequences on the Star Wars galaxy because it's almost like we know the beginning and we know the end, and this is just having to slot in the middle. And I think that is sort of my second issue with the book, is that I never felt concerned about really any of the characters here, but especially Luke, Han, Leia, and Mara Jade, because I know what happens to them. I know that Leia's not going to be captured by the Empire when she's outed because she's perfectly fine and on the rebel base in Hoth in Empire Strikes Back. I know that Han's not going to go, that's it, I'm 100% siding with the rebellion, because as of the Empire Strikes Back, he's still like, well, I don't owe anything to the Rebel Alliance and I don't owe anything to you. Luke obviously can't learn a lot in his Jedi journey because he hasn't trained with Yoda yet. And Mara's not gonna figure anything out about the nature of the Empire because the Emperor hasn't died yet. She hasn't seen the fallout of everything that unfolded. So I guess I never felt this sense of urgency or concern about the main characters because I already know their fates. And my third issue with Allegiance is that there are some coincidences. It's sort of like how in the Clone Wars stuff, the whole thing that Anakin never saw Grievous, so you have to do all this maneuvering to make sure he never sees Grievous. And there's a little bit of that here where Mara can't encounter the trio, especially cannot encounter Luke, and in turn, Leia and Han and Luke can't see Mara Jade because they have no idea about her existence until they meet her years later in the Thrawn trilogy. But at the same time, they're all running in the same space. Like when we have Caldra in the AT-ST firing on Mara, Luke and Han and the Hand of Judgment are heading off to try to save Leia, and they're like, wait a minute, what's going on over there? And so the Hand of Judgment's like, we'll deal with it, you go and get your friend. Which is just like very convenient that we have everyone in the same place at the same time, but Zod is having to work overtime to make sure that certain people do not run into each other because they can't run into each other yet. And I just think that's one of Allegiance's weak points, that you have all these interesting characters brought into the mix, but because of timeline issues, they cannot interact, so it almost becomes farcical at times how much they have to be kept apart from each other. And in fact, I remember that playing out even more so in the sequel, Choices of One, so I'll be interested to reread that a little bit down the line and see whether my feelings are even stronger about that. But in short, Allegiance is a fun, standalone, fast-paced read set pretty soon after A New Hope. It shows Luke beginning his Jedi journey. It shows Han struggling with his feelings about his position within the Rebel Alliance and how he feels about that princess or not. We see Mara in her element as the Emperor's hand, and she's good at what she does, but she's so naive. And my favorite part here was the Hand of Judgment guys, because they see what's wrong, but they're trying to fix it themselves. They haven't really figured out where they fit into all of this. They're just trying to tackle things one at a time instead of realizing that they're all connected and they all have a source. Allegiance maybe suffers from the fact that it's slotted in between two stories that we know the outcome of, so the stakes are pretty low in this, but I still found it a fun read, and I enjoyed revisiting it after all these years. So next time I'm going to be reading a short story that appeared in Star Wars Insider magazine, Odds by Karen Travis.